Good evening and welcome to this hybrid event at Wigtown Book Festival, where tonight I am joined digitally by David Baddiel. Firstly, a warm welcome to everyone in the audience and everyone who is watching online as well. It's a pleasure to be here with David Baddiel. I would say he's a man who needs no introduction, and yet I will introduce him. He's an author, a presenter, a songwriter, a comedian, and a screenwriter. As an author, he's written a number of novels, he's written children's books, and the Sunday Times best-selling Jews Don't Count. My name is Ali Miller. I'm the author of the novel Eva Anna Ada and the memoir The Last Days. The event tonight is sponsored by Shrewd Foodie, so thank you to them. Just a couple of bits of housekeeping. Firstly, it did say there'd be a signing. I think it's quite self-evident that there will not be a signing at the end of this event, but there are a number of book plates, so you can still go away with a signed book. And we will have questions about 15 minutes from the end. If you could make sure that your questions do have a distinct question mark at the end, that would be very helpful as well. So now, let's give a very warm welcome to David Baddiel.
Hello. Am I on screen? Can you see me? Hello? Hello? Ah. Hello, everybody. Hello, Wigtown. Can you hear me?
Yes. Perfect.
Yes, they can hear me. You can do. Hello, Ali.
We can hear you. Hi.
Hi.
Hi,
Is there a delay, or can you hear me as I speak?
I think I can hear you as you speak. Can you hear me?
Okay. I can. Can I just say before we start, I want to apologise to Wigtown for not being there. Basically, I was asked to do it. I did say yes, and then I got offered a television series. And I love the idea of Wigtown and Wigtown Literary Festival, don't get me wrong, but a television series which involves travelling in France. I'm on a cycling show. By the way, I'm not really a cyclist. The point of this show is that Hugh Dennis, who some of you will know, I used to be in a show with him called The Mary Whitehouse Experience, and now he's outnumbered and all sorts of other things. He's a proper cyclist, and we are travelling across France, but I am on my e-bike. He's on his big racer, I'm on my e-bike, trundling along unfit behind him. Anyway, it's a show, it's a series for Channel 4. It's basically Gone Fishing, but with two other old comedians and cycling instead of fishing. And I'm sorry, but the only time they could film it involved not coming to Wigtown. So I do really apologise for that. But look, I'm here. I'm in Bordeaux at the moment, in a kind of travel lodge in Bordeaux.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you very much for your honesty as well. That the fact that you are on your e-bike and you're not actually... Do you have to pedal? Do you still have to put an effort on those bikes?
Well, the truth is it does have pedals, but as Hugh Dennis discovered today, he was really struggling up a hill, and if I press a button on it, it basically becomes a moped, and that's quite depressing for him, because he's a bloke who, he's not been in the Tour de France, but he told me today he's done like bits of the Tour de France himself. He's done sort of 300 kilometres and whatever, and he asked me, what's the most you've ever cycled? And I said, from my house, which is in North London, to Wembley. That's about 40 minutes on a bike. I can do it without pedalling, but I sometimes pedal just for the optics.
And do you sometimes just overtake him dramatically when you press?
Yeah, that happened today. We were going up a hill, and he was like, he's got massive thighs, and he was really going for it, but I pressed the button, and then, boom, I'm off. And I might say to the people making them, don't tell the viewers that I've got an e-bike, and they'll just think I'm really fit. But I don't think that will actually fly.
We'll just try and edit that bit out of the online that's going out right now. Yeah, I think honesty leads us very nicely into this book, which I absolutely adore. David is here to talk about his memoir, My Family, which is characterized throughout it by your inability to tell lies, your inability to be dishonest. I was talking to you just very briefly beforehand about how much I love this book. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the book. Hopefully everyone will buy it afterwards, because I just think it's brilliant. At the heart of the book is your mother. And I don't think I've ever read a book that is so full of someone who you could not make up. Your mother is just, if you presented her to an editor as a character, the editor would say, well, come on.
So, well, I think one of the things about that, Ali, that's very important is, the book is, a lot of people talk about the book being really funny, and that's really nice, and it is, I think, very funny. But there is a serious thing at the heart of the book, where the book begins, well, very early on in the book, I'm at my mother's funeral, and all these people are coming up to me and saying, "Your mother was wonderful. She was so wonderful. What a wonderful woman." And after a while, I just wanted to say to them, "So, did you know her?" Right? Because unfortunately, if people at funerals, which they do tend to do, and I know why people do, I've probably done it myself, just say about the dead person they were wonderful, what they're saying is nothing, right? If all we can say about people who are gone is that they were wonderful or lovely or whatever, then essentially we are erasing them, in my opinion, a second time after death. And the only way to really bring people back to life is to tell the full idiosyncratic truth about them. Because the truth about people is that they're all very, very strange. I mean, my mother a bit more than most, but everyone is. And I felt, as a person who is obsessed with the truth and was very at a loss when my mother died, because she was a massive figure in my life, I thought, I can't bear it. Not only is she dead, but this other version of her, which is not anything at all, it's just bland, seems to be what's left. So instead, I'm going to tell the absolute truth about her, which will involve talking about her being mental and mad and having loads of flaws and transgressive things and parenting really bad and all sorts of things, and obviously at the centre of it, having an affair. But what happens at the end of that is people come up to me, a bit like you've just said, in a way, and say, "I really feel like I knew who your mother was. I never met her, but I absolutely know who she was." So it's an act of genuine resurrection, I guess.
I love that phrase, actually, an act of resurrection. I thought it was, when I was writing about it, the notes that I was writing, I thought it was an act of reclamation, but definitely you bring her back. When you were writing the book, did you feel that it was a way of you being back with her as well for the duration of writing it?
I think maybe. I mean, she died very suddenly, my mum, as opposed to my dad, who had dementia, who is the kind of supporting character in the book. And he took a long time to dwindle away, as people often do with dementia. And so I guess, you sort of get used to the idea very slowly of someone vanishing from your life. My mother went very quickly, and so it felt very abrupt. So I think probably the act of reclamation was, involved with writing about it. I mean, I also did, as you probably know, I talk about the book, a stand-up show, which this book was initially inspired. This book is it's not the book of the show, but it does use some of the same material. And I did that only 2 years afterwards. But on that note, in terms of the reclamation thing, the people I was most concerned about were my brothers. Like, I am not someone who is bothered really about the idea that someone who's dead might be looking down and is this what they would have wanted. I'm not so bothered about that, although because I know in my heart that even though it's very, very revealing and includes lots of things that most people would think, "Oh, you shouldn't say that," I know it's an act of love, right? But for my brothers, I thought that might be more complicated. And both of them were like, "I'm not sure you should be writing this or doing this show or whatever it is." But when I did do the show, the first night of the show, which was in London, I came on, I did the show, it went well, and at the end of it, I come back on again, and it was a Q&A encore at that time, because I was still just working on the show. And everyone had their hand up, because everyone wanted to know more, but I said I can't speak to anyone until I found out what my brother, my older brother, who the book is dedicated to, well, I have to find out what Ivor thinks about it. And I said, "What did you think?" And out of the darkness, because I couldn't see him, my brother said, "Oh, I loved it." And then he said, "I loved it because it felt like she was in the room." And I thought that was really touching, but also artistically important to me, because that's the job I was trying to do.
And it really comes across in the book. She is so alive. And though it starts with her funeral, so that logically the reader knows that your mother is dead,
Yeah.
it's still, when she dies in the book, it's so abrupt. And it's also, I thought what was so brilliant is there's so much of the book that's funny. And then that part of the book is absolutely shocking to read as well.
Yeah.
I thought that was where some of the most beautiful parts of your writing lay, in that part too.
Yeah, thank you, Ali. Yeah, I mean, sorry, I'm moved by you saying that, which is why I laughed out of sort of like sadness and pleasure that you found that, because Yeah, so I mean, in terms of what we've been talking about, she did die very suddenly. Her death was very abrupt. I talk about how she may have even died of a drug overdose because not that my mum was a drug addict exactly, but she had various pains from medical problems that she had from her 40s, and she was addicted to painkillers. And it happened very suddenly and very grimly. And I chose, to write about that suddenly with no comedy. And I think I talk about at the end about sitting with her. Her body is brought into this room where a rabbi comes and does a blessing on it. And I say, in fact, I've never felt more of an atheist.
Yes.
But I also say, this was someone who tried to fill her small cup of life absolutely to the full. It was always brimming with all this stuff. And it was hard to understand how that can go anywhere. Where does it go? Where does it go? And it goes, of course, not to heaven, because I'm a fundamentalist atheist, but it goes to memory and it goes to story. And that's why I guess I have an impetus to tell her story.
Yes, because otherwise it goes to oblivion as well. So
Yes,
you
exactly.
keep that alive. So talking of her filling her cup full of life, what things that are included in the book did she fill her life
Well, shall I
full
start
of?
with shall I do a bit of a reading?
Absolutely, I would love
We'll
that.
give a sense of it.
Yeah.
I mean, so I forgot to bring a copy of the book, but I have got the book obviously on my computer.
And I have a copy, but that's no use to you right
No,
now.
that's no
so
use.
no.
But I have got a copy of the manuscript. So I've put together a little reading with that. And actually, this is some short little fragments actually, because I wanted to give a more general sense of my mum, which I can't do with one reading. So this is from about 20 different pages where I introduce what is probably at the centre of my mother's story. So up to this point, I have talked about my mum being quite a lot more sexually transgressive than quite a lot of women of her age and quite a lot of Jewish mothers. I talk about this joke. I do this joke early on, which I used to do in stand-up, about my mother being a Jewish mother. I say my mother is so Jewish, such a Jewish mother, that if I fell into a river, she would shout, "Help! Come quick! Come quick! My son, who went to Cambridge University, is drowning." And that's true. She was like that, but then there was this other side to her where she was incredibly kind of unusual, and it came out to some extent in her talking very, very openly, far too openly, about sex. And I've already shared quite a lot of these examples, and then I bring something up which I think most people would not expect when you're talking about sex, which is golf. And I talk about how my mother wrote a number of books about golf. And in the book, there are pictures, which I can't show you because I haven't got the book. If I had the book, I would show you the pictures.
Hang on.
But I don't know if you'll be able to find all of them, Ali.
There's a lot of golf pictures, aren't there?
Yeah. But I begin by talking about Golf the Golden Years, which was the first and most successful of 4 books my mother wrote about golf. There's another one called Beyond the Links, and I show a signed copy of that, which she signed Golfingly Yours, Sarah Baddiel. And she signed all of her books and much of her correspondence in the same way. In case you're wondering, Golfingly is not a word. And she also became a golf memorabilia dealer. And she would produce catalogues of golfing memorabilia with little poems in them that she wrote. Here is one. Here's an actual poem from one of her catalogues. What makes the sun shine all the year? What makes all cloudlets disappear? What binds in friendships strong, sincere? It's golf. Now, be honest, who knew that was the answer? But my mother never really played golf. In all the time that she was obsessed with golf memorabilia, I was aware of her having visited a couple of pitch and putt courses, maybe the odd beach-side crazy one, and that's about it. And then I explain exactly how deeply my mother dived into golf before bringing out the reason. And the reason is, and I show a picture of him wearing his golf clothes, a man called David White, who I say is the embodiment of 1970s man. He's got knitwear, he's got a beard, he's got a pipe. He's the kind of man the young Alan Partridge might have wanted to be, and he loved golf. And he became very present in our lives in the mid-70s. Here, meanwhile, is a website that I quote called Dating Guide, which happens to have a section called How to Tell If Your Wife is Having an Affair. And it includes an interesting pointer. If your partner suddenly has new interests, such as golfing, bowling, or any other hobby that you've never seen before, beware. This may be a sign that the other person is interested in this hobby, so your partner is taking it up. So to cut to the chase, when she met David White, my mum fell madly in love with him. And they went on to have a torrid affair that continued for many years. But being my mother, this affair involved an obsessive sidebar. In essence, she took dating guy's notion that if you are having an affair, you might begin to show some interest in your lover's hobbies and pastimes, not as something she needed to watch in herself, tamp it down so as not to alert her husband, but more like a very literal instruction. And then I show a number of pictures that demonstrate just how much my mum followed David White's example. For example, he had a car, a golf kind of car, with a number plate 66 par. My mum bought that number plate and put it on her car. There's thousands of other examples, but the most important is David White didn't just play golf, he ran a golfing memorabilia business called Golfiana. So did my mother, which is one of the strangest parts of this story. My mother's way of showing this bloke that she loved him was to set up a rival golfing memorabilia business with the same name. I'm not sure that's even allowed under corporate copyright law. But Golfiana, my mum's version, was a huge success. She became a well-known figure in golfing memorabilia circles. I show a whole article about her in a magazine called Golf Illustrated. Now, some people might think in this audience that my mother's affair with David White is a sort of complicated thing to write about publicly, which of course it is, but one thing should be obvious. My mother was not ashamed of her affair with David White. On the contrary, she was proud of her affair with David White. She considered, in quite a 1970s way, that having an affair was glamorous. So she was very keen on always telling people about it. And one way in which I demonstrate this is it went on for a long time in my mother's life, to the point in time when she was sort of in late middle age and had another thing that she was very keen to tell people about, which was her various medical issues. This is quite a Jewish mum thing. She was quite keen to tell people about medical issues and about the various doctors and whatever. And these two things come together, I would say, in an email that my mother wrote in 2008 when she was about to go to New York. She contacted David White, who, not uncoincidentally, was in New York at the same time, and sent him an email. And the email says, the leukemia and now also the Crohn's disease makes me very tired, but perhaps you can join me to make the naps more interesting. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that might be might take the record for least enticing come-on line in the history of come-on lines. But the point is, if you look very close, because the thing is that some people might be watching this thinking, well, how did you get hold of that email? And what indeed are the ethics of you reproducing it in this book? Well, if you look very closely again at that email, you'll see that it was CC'd to me. It was CC'd to me and my older brother. C, not BCC'd. Oh no, nothing so discreet. And I actually phoned my mother. I phoned her and I said, why would you copy me on this flirty, weird email to your lover? And she said, oh, it was a mistake. A mistake, right. Oh, I've accidentally CC'd my son. Oh, and my other son, Butterfingers. No, she wanted us to know. So that just gives you a small sense of who my mother was. I've stopped the reading, by the way.
Thank you. Yes, I'm too engrossed. It's quite a mind-boggling story. I think that, we've all been in relationships. Most of us have, at one time or another, had an ill-advised relationship. We haven't necessarily taken on the person's complete job and hobbies and persona or number plates. I love, which you just drew attention to there with your inverted commas, your mother's use of punctuation, because this email isn't an isolated incident, and this strong attention to the affair isn't an isolated incident either. She really wanted people to know. And that's right. I mean, there's many, many examples of it. My brother actually tells a story about how he just started in a relationship with a woman, and he decided to bring her down to meet my mother at my mother's stall. She ran a stall called Golfiana in an antique market in London, opposite my dad. My dad was a scientist, but he got made redundant in his 40s, and he started selling toys, dinky toys. Opposite his stall was my mum's Golfiana stall, and we can talk perhaps later
about my dad and his relationship to all this. But anyway, my dad wasn't there. My mum was there at Golfiana, and my brother Ivor brought his new girlfriend Tracy to meet my mum. And my mum was talking to Ivor, and David White's name came up. Always came up when you're talking to my mum. But Tracy didn't know who that was. So my mum's going, blah, 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 blah. David White turns to this new girlfriend who she's never met before and says, my lover of 20 years, and then turns back to Ivor and carries on talking as if nothing had happened, right? And she was always doing stuff like that because my mother, she did think it was glamorous. I mean, the biggest example, the best example, which I also do talk about in the book, which is amazing. It doesn't involve mentioning David White exactly, but my mother was on a show that I did called Baddiel and Skinner Unplanned. And so if anyone remembers Baddiel and Skinner Unplanned, it was a show which me and Frank Skinner just talked to an audience ad lib. And my parents turned up to see it once, and I could tell that my mother, who was in the audience, was just desperate to be on stage, to be, in fact, play a part in the show, which we called the secretary, which was a person we got out of the audience every week to write down on a board what we talked about that week. And I put this to Frank, that my mum could be the secretary that week, and Frank, who knew my mother well, was not keen. Not at all keen. But nonetheless, she did end up being the secretary, and there's an amazing bit. I mean, there's loads of amazing bits, but the most amazing bit is towards the end of the show, she does this rather sweet thing. It's sweet at first, of saying about me, oh, I want the whole audience and the TV audience to know that this isn't my only son. I've got three sons. He's got an older brother and a younger brother, which is true. And the audience go, ah, how sweet. And I say, I don't know why you're going, ah. That just means that my mum had sex with my dad 3 times, right? And she says, how do you know they were all from your father? On telly. And he's in the audience. My dad's in the audience, right? And it's incredible. It's incredible. But there's something moving about it as well, right? Because I make fun of her for saying that. And she says, I think it shows I had a good life. And I think that's really interesting because the sort of poignant underbelly of all this, in my opinion, is that my mum was a refugee from the Nazis. She was born in 1939 in Nazi Germany and only just got out with her parents, who were very German, Jewish. They lost everything. Most of their family was murdered. And I think that because they had been in the 20s quite a wealthy family and had lost everything, that my mum always had in her mind, or at least in her subconscious, the life that she would have led without Hitler. And in that life, she would have married probably an eminent man, maybe even like a Prussian prince or something in her mind. And instead, she didn't have any of that. She had my dad, who was a very angry, working class Welsh bloke. And I think that this guy, David White, the golf guy, who was kind of smooth and, quite not posh, but he smoked a pipe and he was a member of a golf club. And Jews at the time were often not allowed into golf clubs. I think that was the life. I think what she means by, no, these affairs showed that I led a good life, I think she means the good life that was stolen from me. I think that's what she means.
Which is almost her own act of reclamation as well.
Yes, exactly.
And I love that underneath the humour, there is this real poignancy that she was constructing the identity that she felt she deserved, as well as kind of infiltrating a society, a forbidden golf club. She's really going into it.
Completely right, I think.
And I
don't know if she could have articulated any of that, but I think that's what's happening subconsciously.
And I think it's beautiful as well, because although she's very hell-bent on everybody knowing about the affair, and she writes a lot about it, but one of the things that I loved the most, which comes later in the book, are the love poems. Now, some of those are incredible. They're incredible from an inverted comma perspective. They're incredible.
Well, perhaps I should explain. Really, I don't want to explain it too much because these are extraordinary, and in a way, you have to see them in the book because you have to see them. I reproduce them with screenshots and show exactly what they look like because it's important to see them in my mum's handwriting with her inverted commas. But it's an interesting thing because when my mum died in 2000, she died in 2014. One of the first things I found, which I was not aware of, was this book of poetry called Feelings. And quite a lot of people, I think, if they opened a book that they'd found in their mum's stuff soon after they died, and in it was essentially erotica, right? Really quite graphic erotica. A lot of people would have thought, or shut it, I'll never open it again. I thought, this is amazing. and brilliant. And I kind of thought material as well. This is, this is fantastic. But the way I go into it is I talk early on about how one of the things about my mum, which I think is quite mummish, is she does not know how to use inverted commas. I talk about this with a very innocuous email to begin with. How she this is a very typical thing with my mum as well. She sent me an email, me and my brother, asking if we were doing Thanksgiving. We never did Thanksgiving. I don't know why that came from. Suddenly she's asking whether, are you all doing Thanksgiving? And she says, with a turkey and all the trimmings. And I say in the book, why is she saying trimmings? They are trimmings. Vegetables and potato, that's trimmings, right? But that's just how she would use inverted commas. She wouldn't use them to not mean the thing. That's what, when people are trying to have a go at me, they say David Baddiel, comedian, right? That's how people use inverted commas, annoying people to mean not the thing. My mother didn't know that. And so what's absolutely brilliant is that in the erotic poetry, she uses them essentially for the most erotic bits. And that was my way in to sort of being able to find them hilarious and not cringe at them, because I really would prefer the audience to read them themselves rather than using too many examples of them. Okay, look, I'll just tell you, the most brilliant example is my mum is writing. They're proper erotic poems. I mean, they're completely erotic poems. They often involve golf and golf memorabilia, but then suddenly she'll be having sex with David White. She'll be at like a book fair or somewhere, often somewhere like Wigtown. She'll be, at a golfing event, and then next thing you know, she'll be having sex with David White in the poems. And there's one amazing bit where she talks about David White. She says, I can't wait for you to nibble my clitoris, and it really is an extraordinary moment in poetry.
It truly is. They are truly incredible. I think what's incredible is not just that she wrote them, but also what's incredible is that she leaves them, and that the same with letters to him, that she copies them out or makes sure that there's copies with carbon paper. And I always think that writing a memoir is a kind of, it's quite a defiant act. It's a I'm still here, or a here I am. And I feel that there's almost your mother's kind of moving towards that. She's leaving a paper trail of herself and her infidelity in a way of the most important parts of her life.
I think that's true. I think it's less sexually rebellious than that. It's not. I don't think it's a blow against like her marriage or whatever. I think for my mum, she was a hoarder. Both my parents were hoarders, but my mum, remember, this is a woman who lost everything when she was a child and would know that she lost it, would know that her family lost everything. So I think she kept everything, and she's going to keep the thing that is most important to her, which is her love for David White. And as a side effect of that, her obsession with golf and golf memorabilia, her sort of eroticization of golf memorabilia. But we haven't talked about something which is what is incredible about this, and I haven't really given the audience the full picture. This is a woman who, there was all the golf thing. So this guy comes into our lives who's obsessed with golf. Next thing we know, everywhere we look, there's golf memorabilia in the house. My mum's wearing golf stuff, golf earrings, golf jewelry. Every card she writes is a golf card and all the rest of it. And as well as that, she records every conversation she has with David White on the phone, and all the tapes that are all over the house. Every letter, every love letter she writes to him, she copies on carbon paper and leaves the copies all over the house. She tells all her friends about it, and David White is always at our house, came to my fucking bar mitzvah, for goodness sake. And despite all this, somehow, the most extraordinary thing at some level about my mum's affair is my dad contrived not to notice it. It's a sort of amazing, incredible, brilliant feat of sort of self-ignorance, of self-denial. And I try and make this clear about my dad in the book as well. This is not in a kind of nervous, cuckold, I can't deal with it way. My dad, I think I said at his funeral, my dad was a very sort of angry, in a sort of brilliant way, Welsh working class bloke. I said at his funeral, he's a man who liked food, football, and shouting, "Who the fucking hell is this now?" every time the phone rang. He was a man for whom aggravation was just a constant thing in his life. Everything was aggravation, and the primary source of aggravation was my mother. undeniably. And so for him, my mum's stuff with golf and whatever was just like aggravation for him, and he couldn't be fucked with it at some level. It wasn't really, oh, I'm too frightened to deal with this because I'm such a sort of nervous, cuckoldy man. It was like, what the fuck is she doing now? Golf? Oh, I'm just not interested. So he somehow tuned it out. It's amazing, I think.
Do you think on the one level she persisted with it, with making it so obvious in the hope that maybe he would pick up on it?
I don't think so. Someone asked me that tonight. Someone who's reading it on this production was actually listening to the audiobook. Someone said that tonight. I don't think so. I think that would be too standard of my mother. Like sometimes when people are having affairs, it seems like they're having an affair because they feel ignored by their spouse, whether it's a man or a woman, and they're having an affair to try and tell the spouse. I think that would be too ordinary in my mum. No, I think my mum could not control. She was a boundaryless person, and she could not control her obsession with David White, and so it had to come out in loads of ways. I don't think she was desperately trying to tell my dad. It just so happened that my dad was a bloke who was not interested in the emotional life at all. And so therefore he just thought, oh, she's having some drama. I'm not interested in it. I mean, I should explain a bit about my dad. I talk about him because, the book is sort of set a lot in the 70s in Cricklewood, where I grew up. But then another part of it is set more recently during the time when my dad had dementia. And my dad had a particular type of dementia. It's called Pick's disease. Pick's disease is a frontal lobe dementia, which affects behavior. And the symptoms of Pick's disease include, I think, I read them once, they include tendency to irritation, laziness, disinhibition, obscenity, and bad temperedness. And when the neurologist first told me this list of symptoms, I said about my dad, I said, sorry, does he have a disease or have you just met him? Because that was exactly like my father was always. He was always exactly like that. And I mean, this is a man I remember who once on a family holiday to Devon farted so badly in an antique shop, we had to leave the shop. Right. When we went back in the afternoon, the shop was shut because the owner had been taken to hospital. This is completely true, right? And so I always felt that my dad was just too male, too blokey to sort of even like be on the same frequency as my mother's very intense, very romantic Mills and Boone golf psychosis. It's just a completely different planet, that they existed on.
Because I think there's a line which I'm paraphrasing, and probably paraphrasing really badly, where your mother says something like, it's so tiring to live with someone who does not have an emotional life.
Yes. So that's the exception to what I've just said, and as we know, the exception proves the rule. Yeah. So my mother, was a brilliantly, madly performative person, and actually, much as the book I think demonstrates enormous affection for my mother, enormous affection for both my parents, by the way. Like, I think sometimes when people write memoirs, they're it's revenge, right? And some memoirs are very bitter and very angry, and it's because they feel damaged. And I think I don't feel damaged. That's the thing. I had a very, very transgressive, weird childhood in many ways, but because I'm very happy and comfortable in my own skin, I don't consider that to be damage. I consider it to be kind of accidental sculpture, and I'm happy with it. And that's what makes this book different from Spare by Prince Harry. To be honest. But one example in which there was sort of pain from my mother, and not this transmission of pain into something more sort of florid and weird with the golf stuff, is yes, one day I came back. I wasn't living with my parents, they were about 20, and they were having a row in the front garden of my old house, and my dad stormed off. And my mum turned to me and said, it's so tiring living without an emotional life. And I remember thinking, who is this? Like my mother had never been that articulate about herself. She's someone who, when she did feel that her life was not matching up to what she wanted, which was a very romantic, idealized life, she would go somewhere else. Like she would imagine or act out. When I say imagine, by the way, I should make it clear. My mum was a huge golfing memorabilia success. I have letters from Willie Whitelaw. I don't know if everyone knows who that is, but there's a letter from I didn't even know this until I started researching the book, how much there is. There's letters from Ben Crenshaw, who's an incredibly famous golfer, from Jack Nicklaus's widow, from Willie Whitelaw. There's a brilliant bit. I love this bit so well. I don't know if other people do, but there's a brilliant bit where oh God, I forgot his name now. Who's the famous golf commentator? Peter
Peter,
Alice.
yeah.
It's a bit where so my mum did this thing of recording. I've said already, recording her conversations with David White, and the way she would do that is she had old answer phones in the old days were basically just cassette recorders, and they would just be on record. And if you picked up the phone, then you could just keep the tape, right? And there's hours of these conversations with David White. But what there also is, because I've got all the tapes, because she kept all the tapes, are other people calling. Right? There's one bit where David White and my dad have quite a big chat. There's another bit where my older brother calls and is just sort of sweary because he's annoyed about something. But the best bit is so the most famous golf commentator in of the BBC, he's dead now, was a guy called Peter Alice. And Peter Alice leaves a message from my mum saying, Sarah, do you by any chance have a copy of my autobiography? I've got some friends staying and I've run out of copies of my autobiography. I'm sure you must have a copy. Can you send some round? And it reminds me, and again, I've noticed that the audience are my age or over, so they'll get this reference of the J.R. Hartley advert. It's what it reminds me of a bit. It's like a guy who can't find his own autobiography, but this time has had to go to my mother rather than the yellow pages for it.
And it does come across
Sorry,
how.
this is not your question. Your question was the reason I brought all that up, right? Is that I think that my mother was a performative person, and she was, she was performing, but she actually was the golfing memorabilia queen of North London. But she had these ways of being that challenged this, as you just said, this sort of life that she felt that she should have had that she missed out on. And just once, when she said that it's so tiring with living without an emotional life, she wasn't performing. She expressing that lack straightforwardly.
Yeah, and it kind of it's the line that sort of lies, like you say, the exception that proves the rule. It lies at the heart of the book as well, the truth behind your mother. Moving into your father now, your father's dementia, which again is a kind of sense of someone being erased and before your eyes. How was it writing about that experience? Was that harder than your mother or on par?
Not really. I mean, I think the way that I make sense of the world is through trying to be as authentic about it as possible, and for me that involves a lot of comedy. And there was a lot of comedy in my dad's dementia, as well as obviously a lot of sadness. It's the same with my mother. Is that reality involves sadness and laughter, and we live in a time where people are very judgmental, and sometimes there's an imagination that laughter is just mockery, and I really disagree with that. The epigraph from the book is by a guy called Julian Barratt, who used to be in the Mighty Boosh, and he says to really take the piss out of something, you have to love it. And I really agree with that. I really agree with that. That's why me and Frank Skinner did a comedy show about football, because we love football. So we did a comedy show about it, right? And similarly, I did love my parents, and so I'm making fun of them at the same time. It's a way of celebrating them. And with my dad's dementia, there were obviously lots of sad moments, but there were also very sort of funny moments. And actually, one moment which brings that together, I think, is like one of the things about having dementia, as people will maybe know in the audience, is that you're always trying to retrieve the person who's in there. And actually, my dad, I don't think he ever went away. He was always like, as he got more and more, withdrawn and forgetful, it was still always really Colin Baddiel who was in there. And there was one moment where we were actually shooting a film about him. Me and my brother made a film called The Trouble with Dad, which is about him. And there's two really amazing moments in that film, I think. One is when we're in a pub and we're trying to retrieve my dad, and we do this via catchphrases. So my dad was a man of catchphrases. He grew up in the 50s and 40s and 50s, and he was very soaked in the Goons and all that kind of British comedy that liked catchphrases. And so if you would say to my dad before he had dementia, I'm off, he would always say, you've been off for years, for example. And he had thousands of these. And we would say them as he got more and more into dementia in the hope that he would say the words back, right? And then one time it's being filmed, we're in a pub and he won't say any of them. And it feels really depressing, right? I'm saying, I'm off, Dad, and he won't say you've been off for years or any of his catchphrases, which are normally quite abusive, by the way. They're normally quite insulting, but he won't say them. And I try one at the end. I'm sort of running out of things. I'm feeling a bit exhausted. I say, Dad, have you got a match? And he just looks at me blankly. And I say, Dad, have you got a match? He just goes, no. And I think, no. I'll try one more time. Dad, have you got a match? and something ticks in his brain, and he says, "Yes, your face and my arse." And it's so brilliant because, he's insulting me, obviously, but it's just like, yes, he's still in there. And more moving than that, there's another bit, which I talk about in the book, in that film. My generation of men are somewhat over obsessed with, did their dad from the previous generation, did he love me? He never said I love you, and my dad would never have said I love you to me. There's a quite tragic bit in the book. Some people find this heartbreaking, but I talk about a moment when I put my head on my dad's shoulder. This is when I'm about 12. I put my head on his shoulder, trying to have sort of normal affectionate relationship, and he puts on a camp voice when I put my head on his shoulder and says, "Oh, I didn't know you cared." So he's slightly taking the piss out of me. In this very, very unacceptable way, as if it's a bit of a gay thing to do to put my head on his shoulder, right? And I remember being quite upset about that at the time, and also at the idea later in life that that might be a problem with physical affection with my father, that maybe when he was actually dying, I would be too frightened to hold his hand as he slips away, in case he opened his eyes and went, "Oh, hello, sailor," or something like that. But there's an amazing moment towards the end where we're filming again, and the director of the film, we're just in his living room, says to me, "Has your dad ever said I love you?" Which is that kind of slightly cliched question. And I said, "No, of course not." Right? Because my dad's like too much of a bloke to do that. And he says, "Why not?" And I say, "Well, maybe he didn't." And that's a joke, right? I don't actually think my dad didn't love me, but I say that. And the director, turns the camera on my dad and says, "Your son is saying you never loved him." And my dad, who hasn't understood the conversation at all because he's got dementia, but he's heard that question, "Your son is saying you never loved him." My dad says, "That's absolute bollocks." And I know that that is as close as I will ever get to my dad telling me that he does love me. And more importantly, in his own voice. That is my dad's absolute voice. Truculent, annoyed, male, sort of slightly insulting me while saying he does love me. And I find that much more moving than if that man, which he never would have done, but if that man turned into a different person and said, "Oh, I love you, David."
And I think just thinking about your dad's voice, you're so good at kind of distilling the essence of people so that we get this real idea of your mother as a person, and she's so vibrant, and we get the idea of your father as a person as well. And then there's the part of the book where they kind of actually come together, and both of them on the page, which is when they are suggesting to you alternative names for your daughter, which I thought was also a really quite a funny
Yeah.
part of the book too.
Oh, it's hilarious. Sorry, I shouldn't say that about my own book, but
No,
is
it really
fun.
is.
It is book. I'm going to have to try and remember them because I don't have the book in front of me, but I think I can remember them. Hang on, let's see if I can remember them. Yeah. When my first child was born, who's called Dolly, my parents didn't like the name Dolly. And my dad took me aside, and this is well before he had dementia. He took me aside at the hospital. He said, "You shouldn't call her Dolly because all the other children at school will tease and bully her. They will call her a dolly bird." And I said, "They won't." And he said, "Well, how do you know?" I said, "Because it isn't 1953. That's how I know they won't call her a dolly bird." Right. But they were insistent on this. So they did this very them thing, which is this is the first night of my daughter's existence on Earth. We're still in the hospital in that fragile state that you're in. And we get two bits of card that my parents have sent up from the reception in the hospital with suggestions for names for our child they think would be better than Dolly. And my mum's, I can remember them. My mum's, the first two weren't too bad. It was number one was Ella, number two was Hannah, but number three was Zulaka. What even is that? Zulaka. What is it? Is it a vegetable Zulaka or a meat Zulaka? I've really never heard that before. But my dad's were even better. He went for Ella at number one. Number two was Shenandoah. Shenandoah. Like, yeah, no one's going to be taking the piss out of at school for being called Shenandoah, which, by the way, is a Native American name, which I don't think my dad even knew. But the best one for a name that you wouldn't be taking the piss out of at school that a girl could have, number three was Titiana. Titiana, that was my dad's suggestion. Essentially a name that means booby bumhole for children.
And you've included in the book your mother's the actual fragment of your mother's note, which I think is great, because at the end it says, Have a good day. Love you all. And all is capitalised as well, just so nobody is missed out
Yeah.
of that.
And also, you may remember, it also says on the card, which is again, so my mum, she says suggestions for Ms. question mark, because she has refused to accept that the child's name is Dolly.
Yes.
Yeah.
I thought it was, I love that they suddenly team up as this double act in this section. And it kind of
Yeah.
emphasises the insanity of both of them all at once that
Yeah.
you were hit with.
Yeah.
I would love to keep talking to you, but I think it's only fair that we throw it open to the audience now. So if
Okay.
we have
It's really been fantastic talking to you, Ali.
questions, thank you so much.
questions.
It's been lovely. Let's throw it open. I will try and see all of you. So the gentleman here. Thank you. We've got quite a big auditorium, so we're running to people. Thank you.
Thanks very much for taking the time to talk to us this evening, Mr. Baddiel. I don't know if you can see me. I hope you can hear me. Hello?
Is
No?
that you? Oh, right. No, because there's a woman standing next to you. And
Oh, right. Oh, sorry. Get out of the way.
She's a mic person, right. And hello, sir.
It's, as everyone said, it's an extremely funny book. I loved reading it. I showed it to my partner. I showed her the sentence where it says, "My clitoris is on fire," from your mother. And instantly my partner grabbed it and read it off me after that.
Good.
What I was going to say, you're a comedian. You've written a funny book. And I wondered to myself, reading this, what sort of book would this have been if you weren't a comedian? If you were a sort of more straight-up novelist or a more, I don't know, more I hate to say more serious individual, because you are a serious individual in many ways.
No, that's a really good question. That's a really good... What's your name?
Will.
Will?
Will.
Okay, Will, that's a really good question. I find that it's a really good question partly because it's almost unimaginable to me, because I think comedy is how I process life. And that's not to say that I don't think about serious stuff. You know, Ali mentioned my book "Jews Don't Count," and I write about serious things, but I don't accept there are any boundaries between writing about serious things and jokes. Like if you read "Jews Don't Count," it's got loads of jokes in it, and that's because if a joke occurs to me, I don't believe it subverts my seriousness to make that joke. I'm just trying to illustrate something using comedy. And for my parents, it felt to me like there is enormous sort of sadness in both their lives and in the fact that both of them died. Possibly, both of them died unfulfilled in many ways. But, Leonard Cohen said, and it's a cliche, but it's very true, that the crack is where the light gets in, meaning that it's in people's flaws that you can find out who they are. I think I say in the book earlier on that the dead, despite what we might like to think, are not angels. And the minute that you realise that, in a way, comedy is the only place to go, I think. Because I think that if you're not idealising people and you're treating them like normal, flawed human beings with all sorts of madnesses and idiosyncrasies and getting things wrong, you're in a comic area anyway, I think. And I'm very committed to comedy. Anyone who's read my book, The God Desire, which is about why I'm an atheist, I say that I don't believe, to be honest, that there is anything that separates us from the animals. I don't believe that love separates us from the animals, because I see animals loving each other in lots of different ways, and I think animals can show empathy. There's only one thing that separates us from the animals, and that is laughter. As far as I know, we're the only animals who laugh. I have seen some monkeys throwing poo at each other. They seem to be laughing a bit. But apart from that, I'm convinced that we are the only animals. And laughter is our greatest human gift, I think, really. And I can't see any way that I could write about this without making it funny, is my answer.
Thank you. Do we have more questions? I'm sure we do. Anyone? Yes, right next to Will.
So I'm his partner, so yeah, I did then read the book, which I loved. And I would say I really loved your mother, because I found there was something about her refusal to be shamed. And then when you said when your father was diagnosed with dementia, she was really angry about it. She didn't want to be the sort of selfless carer. And so in a way, do you think your mother was a woman ahead of her time?
Well, in some ways she was. I mean, I think I say in the book that she preceded social media in certain respects, in that I think social media is about people wanting to broadcast everything about themselves. that social media is this strange thing that we've decided that everyone is going to tell everyone everything about themselves and also curate their lives so that they're going to present a version of themselves that is the version they want to broadcast. And my mum did all that except in the 70s and 80s via golfing memorabilia, and also by telling people about her her sex life, which she was proud of. So she was curating her life in that way. In terms of the dementia, I mean, I sort of like that because I just thought it was honest. My mum did have elements of extreme authenticity despite being a performative person. So I talk about how my mum used to tell me and my brother that she'd gone to a group of it was mainly women, of wives who were looking after people with dementia, husbands with dementia, and how all of them used to talk about how much they were trying their best to cope with this terrible thing that had happened to their loved ones, and they would just be standing with them in the illness. And my mum she would say to me, I wanted to shout, fuck off, I'm just really pissed off, I'm just really angry. And she actually said to me once, and a friend of mine has got a husband who's 90 who plays golf. She actually said, who plays golf, why can't I have one like that? Right? And again, I mean, you're not supposed to talk like that about your husband with dementia, but it's authentic and real and funny. I think. I don't know if it's ahead of its time, particularly. I am interested in the fact that your husband read out, or your partner, Will, read out the line about my clitoris is on fire, and that made you take the book away from him. But maybe that's a question you should answer between the two of you. Next, anyone else?
Do we have more questions? No, we don't have more questions.
No more questions?
We
there's
do
something.
down here. Thank you very much. I have plenty more questions, but it would be rude.
Hello, David. Do you think
Hi.
Dolly will be writing about you anytime soon?
It's a good question. I would be very happy if she did. Certainly after I'm dead, I would be only too pleased if my daughter or my son, Ezra, wrote about me in an unvarnished, real way, because it would mean that I'd passed on this desire for truth. I think the only problem is for them, I presented them with a slight problem, which is, as it might be clear about me, is that I tend to just talk about my life and about the life of people close to me or whatever in a very honest way already. And so therefore that doesn't leave them that much room to play with, if you see what I mean. Because what helps is if you can, find things and talk about things that maybe weren't known. I mean, my mother did make this very clear, but not to the wider world. So, I think I've probably exhausted myself. I've mined my own life for comedy already so deeply that if she did want to write a book about me, there wouldn't be that much to say. But I might be wrong about that. She might see lots of things about myself that I can't see, and write about them. So one of the things about my kids that is interesting, like some people have said, oh, because Morwenna, so my partner is Morwenna Banks. I don't know if anyone knows who Morwenna Banks is. She's a screenwriter of Slow Horses, but she's also Mummy Pig in Peppa Pig, which has always been complicated for a Jewish bloke, to be honest. But the thing is that Morwenna is more sort of respectable and proper than I am, and was very keen that the kids shouldn't see the show that I did about my parents or read anything about it until they were old enough, because she didn't want them to have... she was fine with them having slightly idealized ideas of my grandma. But now, Dolly came to see the show that I did, My Family, not the sitcom, in the West End when she was 16, and she's read the book. And I think it does, for her, create a lingering affection for her grandma, even though it includes lines about her clitoris, because I think that for Dolly, who is unbelievably articulate and bright and emotionally articulate, it just brings her grandma back to life in a way that would be difficult, I think, because, when her grandma died, she was quite young. She was 12. But she can remember her more vividly, I think, because I told the truth about her, I think.
And do you think, just to jump in...
Can I tell a story, by the way? Can I just tell a quick story?
Yeah, do, please.
Something totally amazing happened last time I did an event about this, which was in the question bit. I'd done about 4 questions, all very nice questions. And then a man stood up and asked what I thought was a good question. He stood up and he said, have you ever met any members of David White's family? Because David White, in fact, died just before the book came out. And he said, have you ever met any members of his family? And I said, actually, I'm not, but his half sister wrote to me once and actually slagged him off quite a lot. His half sister, David White's half sister, didn't go on with him. And so I then went on to slag off David White in ways I don't normally do. I'm normally quite nice about David White, but I said his half sister said, you know, he was terrible with women and he was a bit of a con man and whatever, which was a bit of a mistake because that man who asked the question then said, well, we might be half brothers because my name is Ian White. And it was David White's son in the audience. And he came up on stage and gave me a hug, and we spoke for about 10 minutes, which the interviewer found a bit annoying, I think. You know, it was really lovely to meet him, actually. He's definitely not my half brother, by the way. I am definitely my father's son. I look very, very like him. Don't know about my younger brother, but don't say that.
You mentioned that a few times in the book. Do you think, given your mother's pride in her relationship with David, and given the fact that she left plenty evidence, do you think she would like the book?
I am fairly sure that my mother would like the book in general. So that's obviously a thing that one thinks about a little bit, even though I've said earlier that I'm not that bothered about like what they would have wanted, because I think it's important how you tell stories for the living, not for the dead. But my general sense is that you know, a lot of the reviews of this book, which have been very nice, and I'm not someone who always gets nice reviews, but they have been very nice. A few of them have ended by saying, you know, really movingly, I think, that one review ended by saying, it's great, and this book allows her to be the star that she wanted. And undeniably, my mum would have loved, in general, that this was a book about her. She would have loved, and is a book totally about her and her golfing memorabilia world and her sort of crazy, rich and strange way of being. Yes, there would probably be a few pages that she would think, oh, did you have to include that bit, that specific bit? But I think overall, she would have loved it, yeah. My dad, is harder to tell with my dad. Certainly, my dad was really funny. My mum, I don't think, was very funny, by the way. Not in the sense of having a proper sense of humour. I think she created enormous comedy around her without realising it. My dad actually was funny, so I think my dad would have liked the book because it's funny. Whether or not he would have been quite so keen on some of the revelations, I'm not so sure. But again, I think, as I say, you tell these stories, you know, to make sense of the world that we live in rather than the world that's gone. And everyone who's read it says, well, this is a huge celebration of your parents. Doesn't matter that you say things about them that are theoretically, you know, not how people are meant to be parents, or not how to parent. It doesn't matter. You know, they're real people, and that's the compliment, that I am interested in them being real.
Which they very much are. I think it's kind of that celebration of humor as well. Like you said, we're the only species who laugh. You speak a lot about the kind of the mechanics of the joke and the power of a joke as well, as a way of a retort to power too, which I think is absolutely beautiful.
There's a bit at the end which is a good example of how much comedy means to me. Because, like, you know, my parents dying, as you say, the chapter about my mum dying is, you know, very bleak or whatever. But the chapter of my dad dying, not so much. And it ends with a joke, which I do really love, which is I talk about how, because my dad had become a bit of a figure on Twitter, I used to, when he had dementia, I used to go and see him every week. And sometimes I would post photographs of me and him on Twitter. And he became a bit of a figure, and people liked these photos or whatever. So when he died and I posted that, I got lots of lovely, lovely messages saying, oh, he was such an amazing bloke and blah, blah, blah. And it was all really nice. And then I got one from Carol Decker of Tapau. And Carol Decker of Tapau, you'll know Carol Decker of Tapau, China in your hand. Carol Decker of Tapau, I got it slightly wrong, and said, sleep well, Ivor, who is, of course, my brother. And I say in the end that although I think my dad did love both of us, he was a man dedicated in the end to himself. And I think he would have preferred it to have been Ivor. and obviously that's a very, very black comedy joke. But I think my dad would have definitely liked that joke.
And I think that's a brilliant one to end on as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Good luck with the rest of the cycling trip. And I'm sure you'll be fine since your bike's electric. But thank you so much. If we could just one final
Can I just say thank you so much, Ali? It's been a lovely interview. And thank you to everyone who came. particularly because I believe this event was sold out before I pulled out of it live. So I'm really glad the half audience who turned up to see me even on screen. That's very, very nice of you. Thank you, Wigtown. And next time I'll come properly and, we'll have a knees up.
Thank you, David. It's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
And we have at the back, we have many books as well, so and many book plates too. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you.